hear purposeful actions, what comes to mind when you think about parent relationships with your teachers, parent-teacher, parent-administrator relationships? When you hear purposeful actions, what comes to mind? Conversations, purposeful conversations, absolutely. What else comes to mind?
Preparing for what questions might, giving a handout to a parent, like in your handbook, that kind of thing. Just preparing for the eventual question.
Absolutely. You know, being intentional about preparing for eventual questions that will pop up. And I love what you said is giving a handout. You know, when we give them our handbooks, do parents read the handbooks? So one of the purposeful actions that we need to do is making sure we have that orientation where we actually hit the hot spots, the non-negotiables for our program. We want to make sure we cover those, right? That's right. All right, did everyone get a handout? Let's take a moment and pray as we get ready to go over this, because I'm realizing my time with you, we've tried to squeeze so much into one day that I just feel like it's so much to go over. And so I need the Lord's help to make sure we hit exactly the hot spots that we need for this section. Let's bow our heads in prayer for just a moment. Father, we love you, and we thank you that you said that the world will know we're your disciples by our love one for another. And we just pray that in this session, Lord God, as we talk about purposeful actions, Lord, that you give us witty ideas, creative ideas for how to communicate your love to our stakeholders, to our parents, our staff members, the students we serve, to our families. And so, Lord, first of all, I just ask that even now that you will just shower your educators, your program administrators with your love. Overflow us with your love so that it just pours out of us like a stream, changing lives as it impacts them. As we come in contact with others, Lord, let them be transformed by your love that they see in us. So, Father, we pray for those relationships we do have with parents, students, and staff members. Any that are broken, we pray for healing in them. We pray for wisdom and spiritual insight into what to do in situations where there may be conflict, what to say. Let us be as wise as Esther was in seeking you in prayer and fasting for your strategy for resolving conflict. And we just thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so as you look at your handout, there's a questionnaire there at the top. And at our school, we used to just go through the questionnaire periodically and say, how well are we developing relationships with our families that cultivate trust? And so as we go through this workshop, I hope to help you support your families better, identify interactions that will reflect a Christian philosophy of education, and help you identify tools and resources that enhance trusting relationships. So what do your policies and procedures communicate to your families? When you think about what you're doing, do you regularly pray for or with family members of the children in your care? Is that a regular practice? Are you careful that your language and classroom practices respect children who may not be living with a mother and a father, or a mother or a father? They may be living with grandparents, or maybe in foster care, or informally adopted by someone else. Thirdly, do you ask families about their culture, their traditions and beliefs? And how do your classroom practices respect those values? Fourthly, are the families of new children asked about their child's developmental history, current behaviors, daily routines, and special interests? Fifth, do you encourage families to tell you about changes in the child's life, large or small? Do you share your observations and special stories about the child with families? Do you have a system for regular communication with families? How do you communicate with families regularly about what children are learning in school? I was kind of shocked. The school I was at recently didn't have any type of communication folder or any set day for communications to go home. So parents weren't reading things when they did send it home because it was so haphazardly occurring. And so we have to work on that. Number 8, do you greet family members by name when you see them? Do you encourage families to visit? Do you make available to families information about resources in the community? Do you provide opportunities to contribute to the planning of curriculum for the families? Do they get to say what they'd like to see happen? Do you keep in mind the faith development goals of family members when you're planning for a child? Do families know how and when to reach you if they need to talk? Are the perspectives of families respected? And do staff members spend time criticizing the family's choices and ideas? Do you take time to learn about the important adults in the life of each child? Are they born again? Do they attend or serve in a church? Who primarily cares for the child? Those are all factors that are important. Here in California, they say a report of child abuse is made every 10 seconds. 65% of the mothers work outside of the home, and a child dies every day from abuse or neglect in their homes. About 80% of that is at the hands of their parents. About 50,000 children die annually in California from homicide. And 1 million children are the victims of prostitution and child pornography here in California. More than a quarter, over 25% of California's children live in poverty. 22.7% in this demographic here. It costs $11,000 a year for an infant to be in child care in California. I was shocked when I read that because in Georgia it's about $4,000. 73% of fourth graders are not reading on grade level, and 67% of them are not able to compute on grade level in fourth grade. 32% are being reared by single parents, and over 300,000 children in California are being reared by their grandparents. So that means that we have to really deal with families a little bit differently than we used to. I was reading recently where the statistics say that only 12% of families in the United States are traditional families. Now, I forgot to mention in our last session, but the handouts as well as the PowerPoints for these sessions are available online, and there's a link where you can go download them on the bottom of your handout. With what you've just heard, one of the things I really encourage you to be intentional about is prayerfully preparing for your assignment. If you didn't know it before today, every family that comes into your program is not there by a coincidence. They're there by divine appointment. God sent them because there's something that you have that they need. They're not an accident. And so it's really a tragedy that we think they are sometimes, and we fail to connect with those families. We kind of do the my way or the highway thing with them, and we fail to connect with them. And so the first thing you want to do is connect vertically with God, because He created them, He formed them, He brought them to your center. If they weren't supposed to be there, they could not have found their way there. His sovereignty would not have allowed it. There's some people that want to be in your program, and God is not allowing it because He doesn't want them there. But there's some that can't find anywhere else to go because God wants them to be right there where you are. There's something you have they need. So connect. And the first way we connect with people, we just learned in our transformational leadership workshop, is by listening to them, observe their interactions with their children. Pay attention to their child's interests, their routines, their preferences, and be able to communicate with the family about that. And that happens during prayer. If you don't have a journal on your desk, I encourage you to get one and just jot down little notes about things that you see, because so often we forget and we fail to ponder those things in our heart the way that Mary did. You know, I don't know how I would have behaved if I'd been the mother of Jesus and known that He was going to be crucified. And I'm sure she saw it coming, because in the Bible it talks about how she often would ponder things that happened. And so it's interesting, we need to do the same thing. We need to have that insight that's necessary to build trust with relationships. Often when build trustful relationships with those families. Often when they see us, they're seeing their second grade teacher or the director at the program they just left. When we're talking, they're hearing that person. They're not hearing us. And so we have to overcome all those barriers to communication and relationship and trust. And the only way I know to do that is by prayer. Because the Lord knows what's in their hearts, and He knows what's in our hearts. He knows where our capabilities are. He knows what He wants to do in their lives through us. And so we have to tap into that power. Secondly, we want to understand the family dynamics. As Christians, so often we talk about how they're wrong, but God sets us in families. And the primary purpose is so that we might develop faith in Him. Child development theories say that it's for socialization, so that we learn social skills. Today, it's a struggle to understand family dynamics because many of the sitcoms, they're so sacrilegious, and they make a mockery of the traditional institutions that God has established. We're in this digital age where families themselves aren't connected, and we are trying to connect to them. You know, you have parents that come into your centers on the cell phone as they walk in the door, and they don't get off to talk to you or the child's teacher. And they pick their child up and leave without ever talking to anyone. Yeah. And so if they're doing that at school with us, what do you think happens at home? When they get out of the car, they all go inside and go to separate rooms and connect with technology. So the family is a social system. We have to realize that families, the parents influence the children influence their parents. Their behavior is kind of dictated one by another. And so when you look at the changing family systems in the United States, one of the primary things we see is more single adults, more people postponing marriage until later. And so quite a few of those children may have developmental delays because of difficulties during pregnancy. There are fewer children. I was reading a statistic that shocked me, said that there were more pets, I think more dogs than children in the United States. I was shocked to hear that. But then I could understand it because I think in our family alone we had more dogs than children. And that was years ago. So I'm not surprised when I think about it that way. But I mean, just think about that. There are more dogs than there are children. There are working mothers, more working mothers today, fewer people having children, more single parents, more remarriage, more multi-generational families. So as I mentioned before, the traditional family unit where you have one man, one woman that marry and have children, they make up only 12 to 15%, depending on which year's census report you look at, of our population in the United States. We have a lot of blended families. So when we're going to engage that single parent or the family that's a blended family, it's important that we do make intentional efforts, have 2 sets of communication folders or 2 different accounts if you're doing electronic communications, 2 conferences or work to align all of the schedules for both households, have storage for overnight supplies or car seats when grandparents are picking the kids up or step parents, or have intentional storage for that. I never thought about that years ago. We only recently, about the last 10 years, that we start having more and more car seats being left at the school for someone else to pick up the child. Extra lines on the forms. We used to just have mother and father, but now, not just in the emergency contact part, we have to have grandparent, grandmother, grandfather, all of those other lines. Documentation of legal issues is a huge issue because you can never keep a child from their biological parent unless you have a judge's order that explicitly explains the custody arrangements. So if dad shows up to pick up his child, he's not on any of your paperwork because mom didn't even tell you that the stepdad wasn't the biological dad, you still have to allow that father to take his child. So making sure that in your policies and procedures, parents are informed that you need that legal documentation. Yes?
The question, if you've never seen the dad before, how do you know he's the biological dad?
Well, typically what happens in Georgia is you call the mom and you say, such and such is here to pick up your child. And she says, don't let him go with him. And doesn't say, he's not the father. Her first response is going to be, don't let him take my child. He doesn't pay child support, or what. She'll say something else, but she will not argue the fact that that's the father. And so he has a legal case against your school and even against you personally for interference with custody rights if you don't let him have his child. In Georgia, we actually have directors that were charged with assault and kidnapping for hiding kids or getting in between the father and the child. Yes.
If the parent that has the legal, well, has custody, like let's say the mother, if she does not designate anywhere in the paperwork, we have no record of his name.
All you can do is call the police and try and stall.
Yeah.
At our school, we had a code. What we would do if we had any problem with the pickup, we would call from the office to that classroom and say, Mr. Smith is here to pick up Jason. Well, that wasn't our normal procedure, and that was code for call 911, because we didn't want to get the person upset. And so in the office, we would stall them by making a copy of their ID and all of that, while the other person that we called was calling 911. And typically the police would show up before the person could get to the child. However, there are cases where women, because of domestic violence, move from state to state or wherever, and then the father finds them, and he comes to the school to pick up his child. And he has every right to have immediate access to his child. Any parent does.
Yes, that's the proof thing of my question.
I mean,
He doesn't.
Joe Smith could show up and more than get Noah Smith, and
I understand.
I mean, legally, it seems like the school would be liable.
That's why I say call the police and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And then you can say, well, let me call mom and hope that he's patient.
Right.
But if he's not patient and he sees his child on the playground and he wants to get his child, do not physically get between him and his child, because you could be charged with assault. And if he doesn't see the child and you hide the child and he's not aware of that, you're okay. But if he becomes aware, because we used to play a little cat and mouse game. We had kids that were in foster care, and the parents would want to come and pick the kids up, and we didn't have any paperwork that said that they could only see them on visitation, whatever. And so we would like take a child to one room, or we say they're on the playground, and take them somewhere else. If they caught us in that, we could, if they didn't have kids in foster care and they were just the parent, we could have been charged with an interference of custody. And it does happen. You can look up the charge on the internet and you'll find cases like that, where a daycare director or a teacher tried to keep a parent from picking up their biological child. So all you can do is try and stall. But we don't have a lot of time to say there. That's just the law. I didn't make it. All I can do is, and you know what? We're not, that's not our field of expertise. We're educators, so the rationale doesn't make sense to us, just like our rationale for not wanting to let the child go doesn't make sense to them, because we're thinking, well, how do we know he's, not the dad? But that's not in our purview. And unfortunately, our protection is that in our handbooks, we should have a policy that says if there's a custody issue, we need legal paperwork from the judge. And that is what covers you. But that's the unfortunate thing, is a lot of Christian schools don't get that paperwork. We don't, demand it. But sometimes the moms don't tell us.
We had an incident where we had paperwork, but we didn't realize it had to be stamped and have what's called a wet signature, so the parents, so we just called the police and they worked it out because they knew that mom was trying to pick up on a day that wasn't hers, and the paperwork she provided
Wow.
didn't have that seal from the court. So it looked like we could release the child, but then the dad, we stalled enough, the dad was on his way.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that good example.
So even though it looks like you've got the documentation.
Yeah, she's saying even though you may have documentation, if it doesn't have the proper seal on it, you still want to try and stall if you can and call the police. But sometimes you're not going to be able to do that, so you just do what you have to do.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes,
Just
yes.
to make sure I understand this. So Joe Smith can come into my office and say, I'm here to pick up my son, but I don't know who he is. But if he says that's my
And he
son,
gives you a state-issued ID, if that's your policy. Usually your policy is they have to have a state-issued ID. He can take his child. But, of course you're going to say,
any confirmation that that's who it is?
your policy would be, hopefully you would call mom. But like I said, first thing at our school, we had a code and we called the classroom, because we were like, okay, this is one of those issues. We don't know him from anybody, and we don't have his name even on the enrollment paperwork. So that's why we would have that in place first to get 911 for the police to get here. And then I say, well, I'm going to call mom. I just need to confirm. And then if you call her I think in the court case where the director was arrested in Georgia, when she called the mom did not say that's not the child's father. The mom said, please don't let my child go with him. And so she didn't say it wasn't the dad. Now, she didn't say it was, but her thing was just don't let him pick him up. He doesn't pay child support. He doesn't have any rights. The court took his rights. She was explaining that to the director, and the director interfered with custody based on that. And that is not legal. We break the law when we do that. So just call 911, because if the police had been there, they would have been able to work it out.
It
Yeah.
would probably be safe to assume you could ask for a birth certificate, though.
You could ask for it, but they don't have a legal requirement to give it to you. And it's like, you have to think about it from this perspective. This helped me a little bit. If I were to go somewhere to pick up my child and I don't have the birth certificate, I think I might get a little bit irate too if you don't just give me my child. Period. I don't know what situation it would be where you wouldn't know me, but there are some situations where it happens, Yeah. A good example is I work with the homeschoolers a lot with my grandson. So a lot of people see me as Nana. I drop him off, pick him up, and they've never seen my daughter because she works all day. Or even his dad, they've never seen him. So if they were to come pick them up, I could see how someone would say, well, you're not Althea, and not want to give them to him. But they would have to, yes.
I've had that situation happen where grandparents drop off and pick up, but the parents are on
The forms.
paperwork, and I've had to card mom and say, oh, I'm so sorry, because she's not the one that enrolled the grandson.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
Said, mom won't probably do have to drop off, but here's all this legal stuff. Talked to her on the phone.
Yeah.
And she said, yes, this is because
Yeah.
new baby, she was on bed rest. I mean, there were other issues.
Yeah.
involved. So when she did come pick up, I said, I'm sorry, I really didn't see your identification.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know who you are."
Absolutely. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has some guidelines for safe drop-off and pickup, and they're online in their Caring for Our Children National Health and Safety Standards manual for child care programs in schools. And so in that manual, I think they do even discourage you from taking telephone authorizations and any written authorization that's not done in front of you because the person could be under duress. So that's a whole nother workshop we're talking about. And I don't know how much time, we can't dedicate any more time to it. But yeah, drop off and pick up authorizations, you do want to make sure your policies are in compliance with the National Health and Safety Standards. They're in the Caring for Our Children book. Yes.
Can you repeat that again?
It's Caring for Our Children, National Health and Safety Standards, and it's a guideline produced by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Board of Health. And so they have pickup policies or standards for your pickup and drop-off policies that will keep you out of trouble legally. And so they even dealing with parents that are intoxicated that pick up the children, want to pick up the children. And your response is always going to be to call the authorities and let them do their job, because you're not a policeman. That's the same thing for the parents not putting the child in the car seats or buckling them in right. Call 911. And that is their recommendation. In that manual, it says anytime you believe a child's life is at risk, call 911. That's your job. It's not to try and, keep that dad or grandmom from getting their little one. Yes?
Call 911 when they've gone off the premises?
Anytime you believe a child's life is at risk.
Or is car seats?
It doesn't matter. Any period. Anytime you believe a child's life is at risk, whether they're sitting in your parking lot, call 911. The last thing is emergency contact priorities. Now you're having to ask, who do we call first? Or who do we call about discipline? Or who do we call about sickness? Or, and put that on there. If they're sick, you call mom. If they're disciplined, call dad. If you, whatever, we're having to deal with all these different family dynamics. And even from this little discussion that we've just had, you see how we've really got to be intentional and purposeful about designing policies and procedures that are not discriminatory and are not unethical. Because some of the things that we actually end up doing are unethical, So some of the websites that I got the stats from are there on the website, on the slide. Barna, I shared some of his stats. The census report has some really helpful information. It's really important that you get ahead of the game. For our schools area, we had a lot of stay-at-home moms when I first started. Our school was predominantly Caucasian with a minority of whites, very few Asian students, and within a 3-year period, it was 43% Hispanic. So that meant a lot when it came to hiring practices, publishing our policies and procedures. All of our manuals had to be published in Spanish and English. And then we had a huge growth of refugees from Rwanda, Bosnia. And so that meant we even had to translate into those languages. And you can do that with Microsoft Word. It's not difficult at all. And so you just need to be aware of that and be intentional. Don't let it kind of slip up on you. So this summer is a great time to kind of look at that. Thirdly, being compassionate about your interactions, welcoming. Often we do kind of do hands off for the parents, you know. You're only allowed to come in the classroom and visit and observe when we say so. But state law says that parents, you should have an open door policy for them. Anytime their child is enrolled, they should be welcomed on your property, whether their child's in attendance that day or not. There could have been something their child had a dream about, their parent wants to come and investigate that, and so you want to give them entrance into your facility. Greet the parents at the doorway when they drop off and pick up their children. Do those daily health checks, and just keep a finger or pulse on how the parents, the families are doing. You know, as a director, I love that everyone entering the school had to pass my office, and so I'd always be there every morning for opening, or if I wasn't there for opening, I try to be there at closing, just to see how the parent dynamic was flowing as they entered the building. And I would greet them there, and it was amazing how much the parents would trust the insight I shared with them, because they felt like I knew them, I knew their kids. I learned all their names, and so those are things that you want to do. We encourage our teachers to call the families before the school year starts and connect with them and make sure that their objectives for learning are the same as the families, or just to even find out what the family's objectives are. And so every teacher would call the families before that first week of school and say, hi, I'm going to be your child's teacher. We met at open house or when you toured the facility. I just wanted to call and see if you had any concerns or questions that I could address. And then what are your goals for your child's growth and development this year? Connecting with them on that level is so important. You don't want that first phone call to be pick up your child because they're sick or they're misbehaving, okay? Sending letters to family members and giving them volunteer tasks are really issues. You want to get them engaged, communicating with them in writing, as well as letting them come into the school and feel like they're making a contribution. Inviting them to visit and stay. Having a way to do that so that it's welcoming. We asked the parents to have their children in the classroom by a specific time, but we had observation windows where the parents could see into the classroom, but the kids couldn't see out. And we also had a monitor in the foyer where the parents could see what was happening in the classroom. I don't encourage you to have the observation of your classrooms on the internet, but to have a camera where parents can stand in the foyer and kind of see what's going on. If they wanted to hear as well, they could come in my office where I had a screen that showed all the classrooms, and it would flip. I could have all of them showing at once or flip one classroom at a time and look at the screen, and we could turn up the volume and actually hear what was going on. But that was so helpful in keeping small issues, and not letting them get blown out of proportion, where we could kind of address things that parents were concerned about from the beginning. So if we saw a parent continually come to the foyer and kind of watch on that monitor, then that kind of let us know something's going on in the classroom they're concerned about. And we could ask questions and get involved, get ahead of it. Fourth, making sure your policies are ethical and your procedures are ethical. Confidentiality is a big challenge for Christian schools because we like to share prayer requests. But a child's academic records, their development, their behavior, all of those issues are confidential. And so it's really important for us to share with our staff the procedures for that. You know, if a child has a disability or needs medication, they really should not share that with someone that does not need to know. So the 4-year-old teacher shouldn't know that a 2-year-old is taking medication or misbehaving. You know, why would she need to know that? We want to be careful with communicating about the students out in public, talking about them while we're at dinner with our families. Those things are unethical and they could really cause problems later legally. Making sure that we have teachers in the classroom that are competent. They have the professional development they need. Because a lot of times that's the challenge, is that the teacher needs growth and development. And the problem the parent has is a legitimate concern. And so I never throw my teachers under the bus. I never, side with the parent and go, well, that teacher was so wrong in doing that, I'm going to reprimand her. No, I always tell the parent I'm going to take care of their concern, I'm going to address it. With the teacher in the room, if we're meeting, I let the teacher talk and then I deal with them afterwards. I tell the parent what our policy, our procedure is, but I never sit there and go, well, that teacher was so wrong, that violated our policy. You don't want to do that. That's unethical as well. But I think a lot of times we hire the person knowing they don't have the capabilities or some skill, and then we don't interact with them early enough to redirect behavior. For instance, yelling at the kids or grabbing the children. Those types of behaviors shouldn't occur twice. If it's 2 times, that's too many times. Making sure we support their natural language and culture. And we were just talking about that with making sure the handbooks are in their language, but also making sure that we welcome them in to teach us about their culture. Now, there may be some things we can't embrace in a Christian school, but we want to be knowledgeable about that at least, and be able to engage them in conversation about why it's not acceptable. Using ITERs and ECHRs to evaluate our classrooms. The infant toddler environmental rating scales and the early childhood environmental rating scales are the minimal standards for what we should be doing. It breaks my heart when I hear about a Christian program where a television's fallen onto a child because it was not properly mounted, or a teacher leaves a child on a vehicle or backs over them because they didn't double check the vehicle after a field trip, or didn't look behind them twice before backing up. When those are all simple things that we can evaluate in our policies and procedures and make sure that we are ethical, we're doing the right thing. One of the things I see them do a lot of times is they're transporting the kids with one person on the vehicle. I would have wanted to do that case study, but I think we're going to be short on time, and I'm going to try and incorporate that later in one of our later sessions. Fifthly, we want to provide parent training. The CDC has provided a lot of resources that will help us to help parents identify developmental milestones and when there's a problem, because we all know that early intervention can help children develop and catch up with their age group. So we want to help parents apply child development theories at home. One way we can do that is have monthly meetings to educate the parents. Refreshments will get them there. Dinner will get them there a little quicker. But modeling the appropriate interactions we should have with the children. I'm going to try and incorporate those videos later. I do encourage you to download the session resources. I want to take you to the website to at least show you some of the documents that they provide. This is a book called Milestone Moments, and I will be giving them out in some of my sessions tomorrow. But in the Milestone Moments books, we provide them to parents, because inside the book, you notice here, it tells the parent how the child should be developing in each domain. So you have social, emotional development, cognitive, and physical. And then on the right side, it gives them activities they can do with their child to encourage their development. Most curriculums will come with something like this. Curricula will come with something like this. But if yours does not, this is something helpful. It also provides a little box. Let's see if I can get to one of the pages that tells the parent if your child is not doing a particular thing, they should act early. And so I don't know if you can see that clearly there, but it says act early by talking to your child's doctor if your child's not doing this skill or this one. They haven't reached this milestone. I love these books because they do provide the minimal skills and abilities the children should have at certain stages of development. And they are free resources that are on the CDC website. Another one I use with the teachers before we schedule parent-teacher conferences is this one. They have a milestone checklist for each age group. And so we ask the teachers to send those home and have the parents complete them at the beginning of the year. And then the teacher does one before conferences, and they talk about what the goals for development are, areas they need to work on. And again, this handout, the milestone checklist, has the domains of development, and then it has the box that says act early if your child's not achieving these particular skills. And so as I mentioned before, these resources are available online for free at cdc.gov. You just type in Act Early. That's the name of the initiative where they're trying to discover any developmental delays or disabilities within young children early so that you can intervene. We used to have a doctor's referral to send a child to get early intervention services. You no longer have to do that. You can call your state's intervention services directly. All you need is a parent's approval to do that. And typically I encourage you to do it with the parent in the room. Here are some other parenting resources that are available. A lot of them are made available by No Child Left Behind dollars. Now for elementary and high school teachers, No Child Left Behind is like a bad word, but for preschool, it's not. It translates into materials, resources, and dollars for your program. So they have audio video materials that are free. They have a lot of books that are also free. I have one that I'll share with you a little bit later. And they even have a link with lesson plans for teachers that has a lot of creative ideas. But a lot of the resources that I have listed on this slide are other resources we provided for our parents. We had parenting workshops. We would use Chip Ingram's materials, Effective Parenting in a Defective World. We'd use Kevin Lehman's material to do parenting workshops, raising that strong-willed child. We'd use the 5 love languages material as well. There are lots of resources out there, and you do want to have a stocked parent resource center where parents can go and get resources that will help them. Now, we would suggest them if we knew the parents were having issues with discipline or diet, or, you get all of those questions. And so we would usually refer them to some of these resources. These are other resources that are available on the National Department of Education website, edpubs.gov. One of them, the one in the top left, Early Literacy Begins at Home, is great for Christian schools for this reason. A lot of times we're teaching phonics and parents didn't have phonics growing up. And so it seems very overwhelming. Well, these brochures, that one and then the one down at the bottom right, Strong Start, both go into teaching phonics and breaking it down very simply. They have a couple of others on their website as well. One's entitled Toddlers Become Readers. And it goes through the basic steps of developing vocabulary, decoding, phonological awareness, fluency, developing fluency, and all of those things for parents in a very non-threatening way. So those resources are free. 7 is connecting to faith-based support programs. We were talking about family issues earlier in one of the discussion groups. Moms with Preschoolers is a great group to encourage your parents to even start at your school, where moms get together once a week and provide support for one another. The Moms in Touch prayer group is also another one. We used to do that weekly, have a mom lead those prayer meetings in just one of the classroom, and it provided excellent support. There are other support programs out there that aren't necessarily faith-based. There's one for parents of special needs here in California, and I think it's called Parents Helping Parents. Has anyone heard of that before? Parents Helping Parents? Well, a lot of times parents of children with special needs have special issues, needing respite care, needing support, needing to know where to go to get treatment or resources for their child. And so that's the support group I would recommend. In Georgia, we have what's called Better Brains for Babies. And often when parents come in and they are wanting us to teach certain things that we don't think their children are ready for, it helps to guide them to resources such as this one. Better Brains for George Babies has a website that helps parents understand how the brain develops and how to encourage cognitive development without pushing down academics on the younger children. So that's something I always recommend for parents. Having translators, most court systems have translators, and so you might want to have them on speed dial and have them come in and help sometimes with your parent-teacher conferences so that you can be sure that parents that don't speak English as their first language are able to understand what's being required of them. Most hospitals will offer classes on stress management, nutrition, even parenting, and so sometimes it's a great idea to have some of them come in and offer the courses, and sometimes they offer them for free or they offer free resources. We had a marriage counselor on staff at our school, and she actually had an office in our building, and she provided counseling, family counseling services, all different types of biblical counseling for families. And so that's something that I do encourage. It may be leasing out that space to someone. Make sure they're certified. Number 8 is helping parents see parenting and their child through the eyes of Christ. Often pregnancies are unplanned, the children may be unwanted in that respect. And so it's our responsibility to help them understand that children are a gift from God and they're fearfully and wonderfully made. They're not each going to be like the other one. You may see favoritism, and so you want to make sure they understand that the children are welcomed, they're blessed in your program, they're advocated for by your staff. Encourage them to appreciate the diversity in their children, not just tolerate it, but appreciate those differences in personality and temperament and developmental stages, especially when you find the parent that continually compares one child to another. 9th, caring interactions. And I know you think, well, how is caring different from welcoming? We just talked about having welcoming interactions. Well, when I say caring, people really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And so I love what Stephen Covey said, is that we should seek to understand them before we seek to be understood. And that demonstrates our care for them. And so it's really important that we practice that. Having those win-win relationships, not always our way or the highway, or you're going to do it our school's way, but how can we best accommodate you within the light of the policies and procedures that we have? Addressing their differences in perception, meeting their practical needs. Here in California, you do have United Way 211. That's usually nationwide. Parents can call that number and get resources when they need help. And sometimes it is just going to that point of need to demonstrate you care, not overlooking their need for reliable transportation, for appropriate clothing for the season, food, help with finding assistance with utility bills or a job, preparedness or finding a job. United Way can help with that. And it's great for our schools to partner with them. Our school was like a resource network for people in the community. And of course, when they come in, they had to, sign that statement of faith, and because we were a covenant school. But we reached out to provide parenting workshops for even those parents that had been reported to DFACS and that were required to go through that workshop, because we were already doing it for our parents. And it was really great to have those parents come and sit in on those sessions and be able to talk with other parents that were Christian and more mature and learn from them. And we gained a lot of students from that. But it was out of our demonstration and care for our parents, where we were providing the class for them, that we were able to reach out and impact the community even further. Be prepared to address kids with parents that are away serving in the military or even in prison. We want to make sure we're intentional about reaching out to them as well, recognizing them for their volunteer efforts also. And then lastly, communicating clearly, frequently, and honestly. There's so many ways you can do that. Your newsletters, I mentioned letters before. We had cards, we had stacks of cards for all different occasions in the office. And one of my parent volunteers, it was her job to go through and recognize birthdays. She had birthday lists, anniversary, all different types of lists of things we wanted to acknowledge that were happening in our families' lives as well as our staff. And she would go through and get the cards and put a sticky on them and put it on my desk or in my box and say, you need to send a card to this person or a letter to this person for whatever, sympathy cards, hospital cards, all of that. We just had a volunteer help with it because I could have never done that on my own. But I come in and on that Monday, I'd have all these cards in there, sign this, write this, and it helped to connect with them and show them we cared. The student progress, we talked about that with the milestone checklist, but also now in this digital age, we have so many electronic ways we can do that. And a lot of schools are constrained by budget. They can't afford RenWeb, or they can't afford some of the other tadpole software and all these other ways that schools give daily reports electronically. But there are a lot of free things out there too. Edmodo is one of the platforms I use where you can upload lesson plans for the week for your classes. You can upload newsletters that provide those teaching and learning objectives. You can put daily announcements there, and it will email your teachers or your staff immediately. You can have people sign up with either student accounts or parent accounts, and the teachers could go in as teachers, and you could identify them when you want something just to go to them. If you want it to just go to the parents, you can do that. If you have older students, kindergarten through second grade, they can have their own accounts and be able to get announcements that way. But you want to enhance communication by having as many channels as possible. I encourage you to have maybe an announcement board in the foyer where daily announcements are there. Maybe on a PowerPoint presentation or something. And I know you're saying, okay, that's one more thing to add to my to-do list. A volunteer can keep that updated. Remind is another one I use because the numbers that would do the automatic calls out if you were closing for weather reasons or whatever are starting to cost so much. And so remind.com is a free one where you can just put in all those phone numbers or email addresses, and any announcement that you need to send out school-wide, you can just type it in and it immediately goes out. And so you do want to make sure that you're communicating. Often parents don't understand learn through play experiences, and so they don't understand the goals for different activities you may have in the classroom, and this is a great way to do that as well. Having them visit the center and observe classes in session and understand the rationale behind certain things are also important. When we talk about conversation with the parents, you get what you ask for. You want to make sure you're asking open-ended questions if you really want to connect with them, and you're practicing what we call active listening, where you're really listening to what they say without preparing a response. You may paraphrase what they say back to them.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.